us being nomadic people and now living in our permanent settlement communities, is that it definitely, for some was beneficial, for others it less so. And how it was done, without a doubt, has not only an impact on those individuals, their families, but also why our communities are the way that they are, and why there are certain sort of deep-rooted notions of the relationship between Inuit and our government, Inuit and non-Inuit. I wanted to read a quote that I think exemplifies or helps explain that sort of what we've gone through. Despite the predictions of Inuit eventual demise, subsistence economies continue to demonstrate considerable resilience and remain integral to the health and well-being of Inuit communities. Now, when I was listening to this morning's presentation, it occurred to me also, and actually traveling down preparing for this presentation, that words have different meanings for different people in different societies and different cultures. And we can share core values or understanding of those words, but how we realize them can be very different. So while the Canadian government, may have had some good intentions of bringing us from our nomadic way of life into the settlements to increase our quality of life, living in permanent houses, having our children receive an education, access to health care, and training as well as employment opportunities. They did that primarily on the notion that it was always better to modernize, to be what they recognize as what it is to be Canadian. And that must be better than, the way that we lived. And so there was quite a lot of pressure to get us to give up our children, to give up our language, to give up our way of teaching, what we felt, of course, we needed to know to be able to survive in the land that we live in, to give up our way of culture with respect to or relationship to our land, our animals, and which includes hunting, and a huge part of our food culture. So despite all those pressures, that sentence or that quote, we've been resilient. We've maintained and kept our language to date. 85% of Nunavut are Inuit and 75% of us speak Inuktitut. But with a lot of current pressures since the creation of our territory, that number is actually reducing. So what happens when you don't create a more resilient community is that you're not able to withstand those external pressures. You would lose your language, and we've seen that happen to our Inuit cousins in the West, where Inuinnaqtun is virtually, and it's a language that's going extinct because it's only being spoken by the elders. And despite efforts to revitalize it, it's very difficult when you only have one generation really speak the language and a few members of the next generation understand it, and then even the next generation, you don't even have any comprehension. So it can happen in 3 generations, and we witness that. We also see that with this immense growth brings opportunities, but not necessarily for everyone. If you don't bring resilience to everyone in your community, what we see is that there's a growing disparity between the haves and the have-nots. So since 1999, we have a new territory and we have the land claim agreement signed, and a small number of Inuit are benefiting immensely from that, while the vast majority are struggling. And 7 out of 10 Inuit preschool children are food insecure. That literally means that 70% of our households do not have enough food to feed their families on a regular basis, because for most of us, there are preschool children in our homes, because you often have 2, 3, or 4 generations living under one household. Also, if you're not resilient, and then there are issues with respect to who's governing, what political systems are in place, and how, or whether or not they reflect actually the way that you would traditionally govern oneself. So we've adopted the Westminster system, which is what most of the Western world has. And there's nothing really inherently wrong with that system, but it's a question again, how do you engage in it? And are you familiar with, the processes that allow you to be able to recognize that, okay, I'm an elected official and I do have a law degree, so I can look at the law and say, well, laws are based on cultures and values, and our desire as a society what to prioritize and what programs or services that we put in place. So ideally, we would see our laws, our policies and programs and services meeting the needs of our people, but we're not. And again, it's not having enough of an educated population that can take advantage of those systems and turn them around for our community benefit. So what ends up happening is that you get the vast majority of the people in your society or community become politically disempowered, disengaged, and unrepresented, and apathetic. Does that sound familiar to a lot of people? I know it does in Canada, and it's not just in our territory. We also see that when you end up having a vulnerable society with little, opportunities, is that when there are things like, the big mining projects or development that's happening in the Arctic, is that you may agree to or accept to development that may not be as environmentally responsible as you would like it to be, because you have such high rates of unemployment and people are so desperate to see, to have jobs for their children and themselves. Again, you need to have the capacity and the education to be able to assess those developments and to be able to say, well, what kind of, under what terms and criteria is that development going to happen? And despite the fact that we have the land claim, which requires for government and industry to meaningfully consult with us, and there exists that fiduciary relationship, often what happens is that it's overly technical and decisions have already been pre-made. And so people, even if they're engaged in the process, feel, well, the outcome's predetermined. I'm being given the 1-minute warning, and this is what always happens, is that on a topic as important as this and as diverse and interesting in our region, this only gives you a little bit of a taste of what it's like where we live. I do want to end with when the commission that I had worked with, a recommendation made by my commissioner to address this situation. We need to continue to strengthen Inuit culture and governance, and to ensure healthy communities are based on the principle that the Inuit must be fully empowered to decision of their own future, to find the strength and resilience in our own heritage based on our own values, principles, and priorities. And we must be given or take the capacity to decide for ourselves how our heritage will shape our communities and our way of life. So I end on that, and I look forward to the further engagements that we're going to have during this conference. Thank you.